no matter what community you're from. You could be a college student, a policewoman, a fireman, or even a local business owner. No matter what your occupation is, put all those together and community is us. Today I have a very special guest, a longtime friend as well, but a very special guest, Michael Curry, the president of the NAACP. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you having me on today.
You already know. Let's just jump straight into it.
Okay.
Now, you was born and raised in Roxbury,
Yep.
Leonard Street Project.
Leonard Street Project.
Single mother.
Single mom.
And you have a sister. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a pretty I wouldn't say typical, but for those of us who grew up around the way, it's not an atypical family. I grew up with an older sister who got caught up in the streets, a younger sister, and then when I was in early high school, I met 3 more sisters from Columbia Point.
Oh,
so I was in Lenox, found out I had 3 more sisters in the Point,
right.
And then 2 brothers from Bromley Heath. So we were all spread out from my father.
Right.
Spread out around the city. So I have a pretty big family, and I don't treat anyone like half sisters or half brothers, which is, it's all love, it's family. So
right.
I have a pretty big family, and it's a good thing.
Cool. All right, so when you were 7 years old, you went to the Warren Pre-Start School?
Nah.
First grade?
Well, see, I actually, when I was younger, I went to, actually it's Warren Press. I just totally forgot about that, with the busing.
Yeah. And then to get to my question, what I was going to ask you, how was racism back then compared to now?
Yeah, it's funny. We were young. You and I are similar ages, around the same age. When you're that age, you don't really get the concept of race. You don't get that when you come home, most of your community looks like you, and there's a lot of poverty, and there are ills within that community, and you don't really get the fact that there are societal inequalities. That's something that you really can't comprehend when you're 5, 6, 7 years old. So we get on the bus during busing, and we're shipped across to from Roxbury over to Charlestown, and people are throwing rocks at the bus and swearing.
I remember that.
We're about South Boston. South Boston. So you went south, I was in Charlestown.
Right.
And it's not until later, maybe high school, college, where you can reflect back on that and understand what the landscape was like around race and inequality within the city of Boston and what was going on during busing.
Right, okay. Now, I also know as you got older, you went to the Boston Latin Academy.
Yeah.
And then you went to the Massachusetts College.
The McAllister College.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I actually went to middle school right over here at Martin Luther King Middle School.
Okay.
So I did my 6th, 7th, and 8th grade on Lawrence Ave at the King School, and then fortunately took the test for the exam schools and made it in the Latin Academy.
Okay, and then you also got your law degree.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, part of what happens when you're a young kid around the way, and it's a blanket statement, it's a generalization, but I would bet it's more true than untrue. Kids like myself had these visions of being a doctor or a lawyer when you're a little kid, and then society, reality hits you. You don't know any doctors and lawyers. You grow up in a poor community. Your mother is struggling, and you see the addicts and the hustlers and the pimps and the drug dealers, and all of a sudden, along the way, you lose that vision of yourself as a doctor or lawyer.
Right.
Fortunately, I had teachers around me who kept saying, hey, you'd make a good lawyer one day. So eventually, after I got through high school, went to college, got my degree in college, and still had a little bit of that insecurity about whether I could become a lawyer, someone said to me, you know what, Michael, I think you make a great lawyer. You need to go back to school.
Right.
I eventually went back to New England School of Law, graduated, and now I'm an attorney in Boston.
Oh, okay. And you also spent like 16 years in Blue Cross Blue Shield, and you was a tax attorney?
Well, I did government relations, so it was a little interesting. I got hired, I did a little bit of audit, a little bit of customer service, and then eventually spent the last 10 of that 16 in community relations, government relations, public relations, and community relations. And I'm telling you, the experience of having all of those, I think, put me in a position to be president of NAACP, because I know about how to deal with organizations. I know about how to deal with regulations and legislation, and I know how to deal with the press. And I think part of that was a training ground for what I'm doing today.
And then actually, on top of that, you're from the community, so you know what's going on.
Yeah.
And another question I wanted to ask you, and I wanted to know, was this your motivation? You participated in the Million Man March.
Yes.
How was that?
It's funny. I always look back. I have pictures to this day of, we got there like 11, maybe 10 o'clock at night. before the march.
Okay.
And we stood out there, not sat. We stood out in front of the mall, right at the staging where all the speakers were speaking that later that day. We stood out there for, I want to say it was close to 16 hours.
Woo.
And it was all brothers, and we stood out there throughout the night. We talked, we debated, we sang. So by the time the sun started coming up, and they started playing the violin music, because I think it was Minister Farrakhan,
right, okay.
Because he's a violinist, wanted to have the violin playing at the early part of the morning. And I will tell you, it was the most motivational, uplifting experience in my life. Just to watch our leaders, various ideological differences, representing the broad range of interests, come to D.C., speak to at least over 1 million of us, and say, hey, we need you to go back to your community, and we need you to make a difference.
That's big.
That, by far, other than the birth of my kids, was probably one of the, it's definitely one of the most remarkable experiences in my life.
No, that's big. I've seen the pictures. Now, I know you won against Bill Owens,
right.
480 votes.
I don't remember the total votes, but I won. So
congratulations! I know you won.
I can't remember the numbers.
Congratulations on that. But another thing I wanted to ask you: why do you think it took like a decade for them to elect the NAACP president?
Well, we've had presidents over the years. We started in 1911, and we've had a consistent number of men and women step up to lead this organization. Joe Feaster, who was president in the late 60s, early 70s, was a young president. I think he was in his 20s when he became president. So I'm not the youngest person to serve in this position.
Okay.
But the challenge is really about a cultural shift. Part of it is, you have to trust that it's time to hand that baton off to someone else
right.
to run the race.
Gotcha.
And part of what happens within organizations is becomes this distrust that anyone can do it like I can do it. And we can't have that. If you're going to run our organizations and lead our community and be our elected official, at some point you got to be moving on to something else and preparing somebody else to carry that next leg of the race. And if you're not doing that, you're not serving the best interests
right.
of our community. And part of that was happening in NAACP. There were people who, didn't want to move on. And the only way you're going to get them to move on and hopefully move up, right, is to campaign, to run, and to speak up.
Get involved.
And we were able to do that. So, all things happen for a reason, but, we're here. And nobody, and this is a generational shift, you and I grew up around the way, when it comes to issues of violence in the community, when it comes to issues that our generation has experienced or the younger generation experience, no one knows that like we do.
Right.
If you're 75, you don't connect with that issue like we do. So though we have
generation.
Exactly. And though we have to understand the remnants, the vestiges of that struggle that we still are experiencing today, we also got to connect our experience and blend the two together to create whatever this movement looks like now. And that's why I think, youth, young adults are so important. There's no progress if we don't have them involved.
Right. Okay, so now that you're the NAACP president, what are you going to bring new to the table that the ones that in the past didn't bring?
So, there's a few things. One is, it's recycling what did work. I think we always think that, you throw the baby out with the bathwater. The reality is that our elders did great work for the last 100 years. They did protests and sit-ins, and they challenged institutions and individuals to do the right thing. So we just have to reinstate what was done right before. So in other words, we're not going to do everything different. Sometimes we just got to reinvigorate, reinstitute what was done right before. So that's part of it. Two is, like I just said about violence and cultural issues, no one understands this culture like we do, like our generation does, because we grew up in it. We know hip-hop. We know the whole street life. It's a different street life than the 60s and 70s. It's a street life that we knew from the 80s and 90s, the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So I want to bring that to the table, and then we want to address issues like, for instance, we're about to launch a campaign called Speak Truth to Violence. First phase of that campaign is what we own as a community, right? Not the Bill Cosby stuff. What we own as a community. If you're playing the grimiest, violent hip-hop and your 5-year-old's in the back seat, what are you giving that child? Are you exposing them to things, to sex and to violence at an age where they can't comprehend that? And then how does it manifest itself when they're 16, 17?
Right.
We own that. If you're fighting, you and the husband and wife, girlfriend and boyfriend are fighting physically, and you have a child in the home, then when your child turns out to be violent, we own that.
Right.
Okay. If you don't get your child a quality education, you're not at the school demanding teachers step up and give them a competitive education, we own part of that.
Exactly.
The second phase of that campaign is to speak truth to violence, which is to hold institutions and individuals accountable for their contribution.
Right.
So the guns in our community, the drugs in our community, the policing of our community, the joblessness. You get a cat who comes out of prison, he's back on the street, but he can't get a job because there's a Corey.
And that's a question that I wanted to ask.
It's a cycle.
I wanted to ask you, are you guys going to have anything in place for those that are trying to find a job but they can't seem to get hired because of their Corey?
It's a challenge for us because our role is really as advocates. You know, our job is to look at who's doing this work and then hold them accountable to do it right.
Okay.
And to do it at the right time. So part of it for us is this. You know, I've made the argument to many people in the community, some business leaders and some government agencies. We cannot expect these companies to open up tomorrow and start hiring these cats that got Corys.
Right.
Brothers and sisters. They're not going to do it. So Blue Cross, Fidelity, State Street, you know, name all the companies that are you know, strong companies in this city. They're not going to all of a sudden have some overwhelming sense of social responsibility and start hiring people.
Let's hire ex-cons.
Yeah, hire ex-cons. They may hire a few here and there, but here's the challenge. I'm saying to leaders now, we need to create institutions in Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan that employ people with Corys.
Exactly, specifically for them.
Specifically for them.
Yeah.
And then has the wraparound services to say, yo, Paul, you just got out of prison. You're back in the community.
Right.
We know you want to turn your life around. We're going to do this. You're going to work an 8-hour day, and within that 8-hour day, an hour of that day is going to be helping you reconnect with your family, giving you some coping skills, getting you the suits and the things that you'll need to get a business, or help you look at starting your own business.
Right.
All of that stuff is what we need, and that's where the advocacy part comes in, because we have to demand that the agencies, the mayor, the governor, whoever else, invest in that kind of employment within our communities. Otherwise, then it's all a hustle. Then we all act like we're doing all this great work, and the reality is we're not meeting the need of all these brothers and sisters who are locked out of the job market.
Right. Another thing, I was watching the news and I seen a landlord who didn't want to rent to African Americans. Do you find a lot of that coming to your office?
Yeah, so, you know, the misperception in society, both here and across the country, is that race is no longer an issue. And because we got a black president, a black governor, and a black attorney general, and a black secretary of health and human services in the state, people get it twisted, and they start feeling like, you know, we made it. But right. The numbers don't bear that out. We still get incarcerated more. We still die earlier of almost every disease. We still get an inadequate education compared to others. The achievement gap still exists. We still get discriminated, laid off, hired last, if hired at all, and paid unfairly, and maybe laid off first. So all those things still exist. So part of our challenge is to say, oh, we want to receive all these complaints, start to look at trends, and we can call institutions, we can call businesses, we can call the city, we can call the state and say, hey, here's what we're finding is true for people of color, and we need you to address it.
That's true.
And then do the kind of old school work that they used to do back in the day. Then you take it to the street. Then you say, hey, we're going to do a little press conference to show that there's employment discrimination, or do a press conference to show that, hey, there's, you know, black men and women can't get construction jobs.
That's true.
All this construction through the Stimulus Act, through you know, some of the other legislation, all this work that's going on in the community, and that people coming in and do this work doesn't look like us.
That's true.
And then there's no pipeline to create these young men and women who then become construction workers and maybe own their own construction companies. That's a problem.
That is a
problem.
problem.
To your point, discrimination is rampant, and it's our jobs to point out where it exists.
Make sure y'all go to that website. Thanks for coming down, Michael Curry. I appreciate it. That's all the time we have for you guys. We'll see y'all next time. Same station. Stay tuned.
Peace.
We out.